Hi there. My name is Brian Sandroff, and today I'm going to discuss the effects of exercise training on cognition in people with MS. So, as you're probably aware, cognitive impairment is a major consequence of the disease. And this impairment occurs across multiple domains, most notably reductions in cognitive processing speed, learning and memory problems, and executive dysfunction. MS-related cognitive impairment is highly burdensome and is poorly managed with disease-modifying therapies and symptomatic treatments. This highlights the importance of considering other approaches for managing cognitive impairment in MS, and one such approach involves exercise training. But why? There's actually evidence that exercise is beneficial for cognition in other populations besides MS, and this works from the cellular level up to the societal level. For example, there is evidence that voluntary wheel running is associated with cognitive improvement and improvement in brain structure in rodents. There's evidence that exercise enhances academic achievement in children, improves cognitive performance in healthy adults, and even promotes healthy aging in older adults. There too is evidence whereby exercise improves cognition in neurological populations like schizophrenia. Jumping to MS, there's evidence that supports that physical and cognitive domains of functioning are interrelated, maybe because physical function and cognitive function rely upon similar brain processes. This highlights that maybe a targeted intervention like exercise might improve a certain brain area that might result in improvements in both physical and cognitive function. So let's jump to what we know about the effects of exercise on cognition in people with MS. So right here is a graph that shows the number of studies on the effects of exercise on cognition in MS every year for the last 17 years, from when the very first study was published in 2004 through now. As you can see, this is a perfect example of exponential growth. The field is rapidly expanding and exploding. And I want to draw your attention to two critical points in this exponential growth. The first was in 2011, where we published the very first review outlining the rationale for why we should examine the effects of exercise on cognition in MS. And we did this because at this point, this was considered sort of a dead field, as in 2004 and 2005, there were two studies that were published that demonstrated null results of exercise on cognition. And we argue that that's not because exercise doesn't improve cognition in MS. It's because we're not testing it the right way. The second critical point, which occurred right before this explosion of research, was in 2016, where we published the very first systematic review on the overall effects of exercise on cognition in MS. And I want to note that a systematic review is a way to quantify the overall effects of an intervention in a population. And I'm going to go through that systematic review now, and I'll indicate why there was exponential growth after. So in 2016, we examined 9 studies, and that was all the available evidence that we had at the time on the effects of exercise on cognition in MS. And we concluded that there was conflicting evidence where we couldn't provide firm recommendations on the beneficial effects of exercise on cognition. This was because only 4 of the 9 studies supported exercise, whereas 5 of the 9 studies, the other half, didn't support exercise. But the really interesting part, which gave rise to this exponential growth of research, was that we identified emerging themes across the 9 studies that were published in an 11-year span. The primary themes being that cognition was generally included as a non-primary outcome, meaning that the studies were not systematically designed to improve cognition. Only 1 of the 9 studies recruited people with MS who were cognitively impaired. This is a big issue, as we really want to include people with MS who have the problem that we're trying to fix. Of the 9 studies, there were many different exercise programs and many different cognitive outcomes where it was difficult to make a firm recommendation as to participating in a type of exercise that might result in a certain cognitive improvement. In addition, many of the 9 studies in this time period involved low-quality experimental designs where it was difficult to infer causality, where exercise might cause some cognitive effect. So, since that systematic review 5 years ago, oh, my light just turned off. Sorry, I have a motion sensitive light in my office. That's funny. Um, since 2016, there have been 29 studies that have been published in just 5 years, compared with the 9 studies that were published in the first 11 years in this field. And there's some good news associated with this large body of evidence. There were generally beneficial effects of exercise on cognition in people with MS, and these benefits occurred across multiple cognitive domains. In fact, the cognitive domains that are most commonly impaired in people with MS. In addition, some more good news is that the study quality had generally improved. The majority were randomized controlled trials to where we could infer some degree of causation. There were some papers that also included neuroimaging outcomes so we could evaluate the extent to which exercise represents a neuroplasticity-inducing behavior in people with MS. And there too were some papers that were published on the long-term sustainability of the beneficial effects of exercise on cognition. That is, after an exercise training study ended, cognitive improvements were maintained over time. However, hate to be a Debbie Downer, but there were some bad news as well. And then the majority of studies involved small samples, and only 2 of the 29 studies recruited cognitively impaired people with MS, again, underscoring how big of a problem this really is. In addition, the majority of studies were not systematically designed to improve cognition, but were performed for other purposes and included cognition as a secondary outcome. Some more bad news was that there were many different interventions, comparison conditions, and outcomes to where it's still difficult to generate firm conclusions. There were very few studies in progressive MS and people with severe disability, as the majority of studies were performed in people with mild to moderate forms of the disease. And there too were no large multi-site phase 3 trials as there are for the disease-modifying therapies. So it's difficult to situate exercise as a disease-modifying behavior. So the take-home points is that the overall evidence based in this area is rapidly expanding, but the evidence is still mixed. However, there is a noticeable trend for research reporting on exercise training related improvements in cognition in people with MS. However, the methodology does need to improve in order for us to generate stronger conclusions and ultimately develop guidelines for people with MS to engage in certain types and intensities and volumes of exercise in order to experience cognitive improvements. And that's really where we want to be headed. And for us to get to that point, research needs to be able to provide comprehensive rationale for why we're examining certain types of exercise, for improving certain cognitive outcomes in certain samples of people with MS, and why exercise might result in cognitive benefits. This seems like a really daunting task. However, we have a great guideline to use, and that's the older adult literature that has been doing this for upwards of 4 decades. The MS literature is just a little bit behind, but that's okay. We should be able to play catch up. I want to highlight one of our very recent studies that just was published a few days ago, in fact, because this study, although in a small sample, did include several methodological aspects that have not been done in the overall field. This study involved a randomized controlled trial with a high quality control condition. The exercise programs were systematically developed to specifically improve learning and memory as a primary outcome. We also included hippocampal neuroimaging outcomes, and we pre-screened people with MS for objective impairment in learning and memory. The problem with this study is that it involved a relatively small sample based on restrictions due to COVID-19. The overall results were that relative to a control group, exercise training was associated with moderate benefits in learning and memory and very large benefits on hippocampal volume. In fact, the intervention based on that solid line was associated with preserved hippocampal volume, whereas the control condition, the dashed line, was associated with loss of hippocampal volume over 3 months. I also want to draw your attention to a study that we're also conducting at the same time on cognitive processing speed as a primary outcome. And that study will be going on for another 2 years at least. And it is going on currently at Kessler Foundation in northern New Jersey. Here's our shameless plug for our study flyer. scan the QR code, contact Grace, our research coordinator. She'd be happy to explain as much as you'd like about the study and see if this is the right study for you. We have some other studies at Kessler Foundation too on cognition. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions or concerns, here's my email. I'm also relatively new to social media, so please add me on Twitter and Instagram. Here are my handles. Thank you.